Good evening and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Sudaso and this is the weekly monk chat, your opportunity to ask questions about Buddhism and our opportunity to attempt to answer them. So if you're interested in getting some responses to questions about Buddhism, you're welcome to put them in the comments window and we'll do our best to answer. We seem to be having some technical issues here, so if you could wait just a moment. Can you get an external mouse? There we go. Okay. So we'll start with homage to the Buddha, and then I'll start reading through the questions and giving some responses. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Okay, so first off, welcome to all the people who are joining in. Welcome to Joseph, Richard, Wasabi-chan, HPD, Anna Maria, Moria, Kaiser Friend, Vanessa, Victoria, Kumu, Jayanta, Sud, Lydia, Ryan, Bhumika, and anyone else who's present watching. It's good to see so many people interested in the Dhamma. And Joseph here is asking for teachings on Samyutta Nikaya 46.6. So we can add that to the list. Okay. And there's also a question here. Joe says, in the Chundi Sutta, Guttara Nikaya 5.32, it says that of all things, both conditioned and unconditioned, viraga has been declared by the Buddha to be supreme. And so Joe is asking, why is this quality foremost of all things? Well, so viraga means to, viraga is usually translated as dispassion from the prefix vi, which means separate or without, and the word raga, which means passion or lust, obsession, fixation. So then viraga means then to be without passion, without lust, to be without obsession or fixation. And this is the foremost of all things because it leads directly to awakening. So when there is dispassion, then the Buddha says, when there is dispassion, then the mind becomes liberated. So there's a line that we see in many places in the suttas that goes, Nibindang virajati viraga vimuchati, which means when there is disenchantment, then dispassion comes to be. So disenchantment produces dispassion. Nibindang virajati, disenchantment produces dispassion. And viraga vimuchati, dispassion liberates. So that line, viraga vimuchati, dispassion liberates. So this is why viraga is the foremost of all things, whether conditioned or unconditioned, is because viraga liberates the mind from all suffering and confusion. It liberates the mind from samsara. And Richard says, I'd like to ask for some examples of sense restraint, of sati sampajanya, and their difference, please. Okay, so sense restraint, in the sutta, sense restraint is defined as when seeing something, or hearing something, or smelling something, or tasting something, or touching something, or cognizing a mental object. So basically, whenever having any kind of sensory experience, the Buddha says, do not fixate on its characteristics. Because if we fixate on its characteristics, then the mind can be invaded with desire and aversion. So sense restraint doesn't mean that we ignore our sensations, but rather it means that we do not fixate on any characteristics that might be provocative of defilements, that might provoke desire or aversion. And sati sampajanya. So sati is usually translated as mindfulness. Sampajanya is a bit more difficult of a word to directly translate into English. So it's commonly translated as things like clear comprehension, or situational awareness, or terms along those lines. And in the suttas, sati and sampajanya usually come together. So indicating that one is both clearly aware of something and also understanding its context. So placing it in its contextual setting. So sati sampajanya doesn't necessarily come together with sense restraint, but it is a prerequisite for sense restraint. One needs to be clearly aware and clearly comprehending of one's sensory experiences in order to recognize the tendency towards fixation on characteristics, the tendency to get caught in details that provoke desire or aversion. So an example of sense restraint, so again, maybe you're in the monastery and you smell some delicious smell coming from the kitchen. Maybe somebody's cooking something in the kitchen and it's making a tantalizing aroma. Well, what we normally will tend to do is we'll tend to fixate on that characteristic, that feature, that sensory detail, which provokes desire. So then sense restraint is to be aware of the sensation, but not to fixate on it, not to give it any extra importance, not to give any extra importance to any particular sensation over any other. And in this way, one is cultivating equanimity and weakening the tendency towards desire and aversion. HPD says, can you speak about the Visuddhimagga and how to practice it in relation to metta? Okay, so the Visuddhimagga is a book written 1,000 years after the Buddha by a famous monk in Sri Lanka who was directly sponsored by the royal government at the time in Sri Lanka. It's awful. Don't read it. It's a waste of time. It's useless. At best, it's useless. At worst, it's misleading. There's a few decent things mixed in with all the other garbage, but it's not worth it. Just read the suttas. The Visuddhimagga is a really big, thick book. If you're going to spend that much time reading a big, thick book, just read the suttas. Reading the suttas is not much longer than reading the Visuddhimagga. The difference is that the suttas are actually real Dhamma and genuinely useful material. Whereas the Visuddhimagga is full of misinformation, it's full of wrong Dhamma, and it will just make you more confused. So the best way to practice the Visuddhimagga is to not read it at all. Just read the suttas. Anna Maria says, how does the Buddha describe the realization of no self, or where in the suttas can I read about this? So one of the interesting things about the suttas is that the Buddha mostly doesn't talk about what it's like to attain awakening. He just talks about how to get there. And when he does talk about what it's like to attain awakening, he speaks about it only in the most general and broad terms. So the realization of no self, so one of the basic principles of Buddhist thought is that there is nothing whatsoever which has any lasting existence. So nothing whatsoever is persistent or substantial. And this means that whatever we identify as ourself is also non-persistent and therefore not our true self. So whatever we currently think of as me is just a temporary experience. So the realization of no self is recognizing that whatever we currently think of as self is actually not self. It's just a temporary experience, or just a manifestation of nature. So the effect then is that the mind becomes extremely serene, unbothered. We're only bothered by what happens because we think it's happening to me. If there is nothing that we identify as me, then there's nothing to be bothered by. So the Buddha describes awakening as an experience of serene bliss, of unconditional happiness, boundless joy. And it is precisely because one realizes that there is no self, and therefore there is no me that can be affected or disturbed or bothered by anything at all. So it's in the suttas, it's sometimes referred to as a sense of invincibility, sense of perfect immunity, being absolutely undefeatable. Okay. Moria says, since I've started a regular exercise routine, after some time of very little activity, the energy is causing a lot of restlessness in meditation. It's to the point that sitting for more than 10 minutes feels like torture, and I can't make it to the timer that I've set for 20 minutes. How can I work with the increased energy so it isn't turning into restlessness in meditation? Well, first off, if you set a timer, do not get up until the timer goes off. And if 20 minutes is too long for you right now, then set a shorter timer. But keep to that resolution of once you set the timer, you don't get up until it goes off. So if 20 minutes is too much, well, then set it for 15 minutes then. So as for the feeling of restlessness, first of all, I recommend observing the feeling of restlessness. It's actually a very interesting sensation. Observe it with curiosity, with interest. Now, what does restlessness feel like? Let's have a look. Another thing I really recommend is to relax your physical posture a bit. So let your body slump a bit, like just let everything just kind of melt into the cushion. Let your eyelids droop, relax your face, just let your whole body slump. And often that has the effect of soothing the mind. Another thing that's really useful is to stop trying to do any meditation method at all. Don't try to do anything at all. Just sit there, just slump there on your cushion, like a melting snowman, and just do absolutely nothing. Just enjoy the serenity of not having to do anything at all. Enjoy the silence, enjoy the stillness. Be lazy. Be totally lazy. And what you'll find is that this directly counteracts the restlessness of mind. Works against it directly. But it doesn't take any effort. In fact, it's the opposite. It's non-effort that counteracts restlessness. Another option is to do loving-kindness meditation. That works for just about everything. Both restlessness and sleepiness, for both you do loving-kindness meditation. Kauser Friend says, could an artificial life form be subject to samsara? What's an artificial life form? Are you talking about robots or something? I wouldn't classify them as a life form. I just classify them as inanimate matter. So it depends on what you mean by artificial life form. Technically speaking, all life forms are artificial from one way of looking at things, because we're all made up of sankharas. So yeah, you have to define what you mean. Yeah, maybe if you can clarify your question, I can give a more useful answer. Victoria says, I've heard that stream enterers know without a doubt that they are stream enterers. What are the experiences they encounter that make them certain? So that is part of how it's defined in the suttas. In the suttas, it does say that a stream enterer knows with absolute certainty that they are a stream enterer. And they have absolute faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. So absolute faith that the Buddha was fully enlightened, absolute faith that the Dhamma leads to awakening, and absolute faith that the monastic Sangha, the monastic life, is the ideal vessel for attaining awakening. So if any of those qualities are lacking, then someone's not a stream enterer. So that's one way that one can know for sure. But actually, there's a great sutta on this, the Kosambhya Sutta, which contains in it a list that's sometimes called the 7 reviewing factors of stream entry. That lists 7 qualities of a stream enterer, 7 behaviors and attitudes that a stream enterer has. And that, together with the 3 lower fetters, gives you in total a list of 10 things, which can be used to know for sure that one is a stream enterer. But as for what the experience they encounter that makes them certain, it is, in fact, dropping identification with body and mind. So all unawakened beings, on some level, believe, I am this body, I am these thoughts, I am these emotions, I am these opinions, I am these memories, one or more of these things. Or they think, I am inside this body, I am inside this mind, or they think, this body and mind is inside of me, so I have some kind of big self that includes this body mind. So they have some kind of concept of self-existence in relationship to the components of body and mind. So with stream entry, that drops away, and one clearly sees the body is not me, the body is not mine. One clearly sees the mind is not me, the mind is not mine. Feelings are not me, feelings are not mine. Sensations, perceptions, thoughts, memories, even sense consciousness, all of this is not me and not mine. This is just a part of nature. That's all. It's not me, it's not mine, it's not personal in any way. So a stream enterer then directly confirms the truth of the Buddhist teachings of anatta, of non-self. They're not yet fully enlightened. There's still more to be done. But the Buddha says that such a person has, they're 99% of the way there. So that's actually really, really good. And that's enough to give them absolute faith in the truth of anatta. Because once they've seen 99% of it, then the other 1% is inferred, and they know what they need to do. So this is another thing about a stream enterer, is that they are said to be guaranteed to attain awakening, because at that point, they know exactly what needs to be done in order to attain full awakening. So a stream enterer is also said to be independent of others. They no longer need a teacher. It's called aparapachaya. Aparapachaya is the term that's used in the suttas to define when talking about a stream enterer. It means they do not depend upon another. They don't rely on another. They don't go back to another. In other words, they have no use for a teacher. A teacher can maybe help them progress to the higher stages of awakening more quickly. Mahamoggallana was famous for doing this in the suttas. Mahamoggallana was known for helping stream enterers progress more swiftly to full awakening. But it's technically not necessary. Stream enterer already knows the way to awakening. They're already 99% of the way there. They know what else they need to do. It's just a matter of time. So that's another characteristic of a stream enterer. A stream enterer has no need for a teacher because they know exactly how to get to full awakening. Vanessa says, what is the best way we can remedy the feeling of despair? Through reflecting on the possibility of attaining awakening. The incredible, optimistic, joyful hope that the Buddha Dhamma gives us. This hope that awakening is possible. Hope that we actually can attain unconditional happiness and perfect wisdom. Hope that we actually can purify our heart of all its flaws and corruptions. So this is the bright future that we can see through the lens of the Dhamma. So whatever difficult conditions we have right now that might be giving rise to a feeling of despair, we don't need to worry about that, because awakening is possible. Purity of heart is possible. Perfect happiness and wisdom is possible. So when we reflect on this, then despair tends to fall away. Also, loving kindness meditation and acts of compassion, doing acts of generosity and compassion, that also helps to counter despair. And Jojo says, is there any information in the sutta saying if there are animals outside of the human realm, heavenly realms? So that's not quite what realm means. So realms, when the Buddha is talking about realms of rebirth, realms of existence, it's not necessarily talking about different physical locations, but rather it's about categories of existence. So kind of like how in biology they classify life forms into different kingdoms and different genotypes and so on. So it's not that, say, mammals and insects live in completely different parts of the world. They're all living all mixed together, but they're distinctly different categories of beings. So that's how it is in the system that's described in the suttas, is that we're all mixed together in the same universe, but there are distinctly different categories of beings. And each category has a set of characteristics and more or less in common. And things kind of blur together a little bit at the edges of some of where these categories can join. But for the most part, each category provides a relatively coherent set of shared characteristics. So animals then are all of the beings that have the animal characteristics. And humans are all the beings that have human characteristics. And each of the deva realms each has their own set of characteristics. And all the beings that have those characteristics are said to be part of that category. So I think category is maybe a better word than realm. Because when we say realm, we tend to think of a physical place. Like Russia is a place. So everybody in Russia is called Russian. It's like, well, okay. But that's not what we're talking about when we talk about realms of existence. We're talking about categories of beings. So there's a cat in the monastery. The rest of us are humans. So does that mean there's a cat in the human realm? No, there's a cat in the cat realm, and there's humans in the human realm, and we just happen to be in the same physical location. So Helen says, when is your next event? Does this qualify? I think this is an event. If you mean our next in-person event, it happens every Saturday and Sunday. We have in-person programs every Saturday and Sunday. Moria says, can you please describe your mindfulness of body practice? Does it include mindfulness of breathing? Have you made guided meditation videos on mindfulness of body? Probably at some point in the past, there's been some videos with me doing guided meditation on mindfulness of the body. Probably, you could probably find it. I remember things like that happening in the past, but you'd have to dig for it, but I'm sure it exists on our YouTube channel somewhere. My mindfulness of the body practice is to have a still awareness of my entire body all at once, as a single zone of sensation, or a single object, you might say. without giving preference to any one part of the body over any other, but also without moving the mind through the body at all. Does it include mindfulness of breathing? Yes, because breathing is included within the body zone. I just don't give any preference to the breathing sensations. So they're not, so it's just the whole body all at once, which includes the breath sensation, but without fixation on that part of the body in particular. Ryan says, is Citta like an overarching sentry working with karma to prevent us from dying in otherwise dangerous, precarious past or present sensations we may have been involved in? For example, almost drowning, falling on our heads, being run over, etc. But if it hadn't been for luck, I would have been dead a long time ago. Very curious. I don't understand. I don't understand. Is Citta like an overarching sentry working with karma to prevent us from dying? No. No. Nope. Yeah, no. And then Mr. says, where can you even read the real suttas? Not something on the internet. Incorrect. They are on the internet. Go to Sutta Central. On Sutta Central, you can find all the suttas for free. Most of the translations are by Bhante Sujato, but there's also a number of others from other translators there as well. Ryan says, is karma the reason why exist and what will get reborn? Karma is the reason why we seem to exist. And what will get reborn? Technically, what happens is that each moment creates the conditions for the subsequent moment to come into being. So technically speaking, nothing gets reborn. Rather, what happens is that present moment conditions create the next moment. And those moments' conditions create the next moment, and so on. And so this creates the illusion of a being passing through multiple lives. But actually, it's just a series of adjacent moments linked together by causality. Oh, and Ryan then clarifies, it says, is karma the reason why we are here / exist? Yes. Why we seem to be here, why we appear to exist. And what will get reborn minus our defilements? So any habits and tendencies of mind will tend to be copied into future moments or influence future moments. So not just defilements, but also good habits, good tendencies. That's part of how Buddhism operates. We cultivate wholesome habits, and then that means in future moments, more wholesome habits will be present until eventually we attain full awakening. Ryan says, regarding Citta, could you expound what Citta is, please? So Citta just means mind. It's related to the verb chinteti, which can mean both think and also intend. So Citta, it just means mind. That's all. So it's the non-physical component of being. That's all. Mary says, there was a terrible earthquake in Myanmar and Thailand. Does anyone know if Venerable Metiko is okay? We'll contact him and make sure he's okay. Can you reach out to him? Okay, we'll talk tomorrow. Yeah, we'll reach out to him and make sure he's okay. Okay, and Sud says, how should one deal with parents who are against one's Buddhist practice and urge that person to follow their religion instead of the Buddhist teaching? React with kindness and patience and tolerance, and look for the good things in their religious practices. Look for the things that are similar to Buddhism and praise those things. Praise the good things that they do. Praise the wholesome attributes of their religious practices. Participate to the extent that you feel comfortable. Participate in their religious activities. And keep your commitment to Buddhism as well. So respect and appreciate the wholesome qualities of their religious practices, and continue doing your own. And try to avoid religious arguments with your family. It's almost always useless. Yeah. Mutual appreciation is the way, rather than arguing. And if there's no mutual appreciation, then you can at least do one-sided appreciation. You can appreciate the goodness of what they're doing, even if they don't appreciate the goodness of what you're doing. But odds are they probably will, sooner or later. And Jojo says, if we don't become stream enterers, are we basically pulled back into the current of samsara, stuck there until we perhaps by chance come across the Buddhist teachings again? Yeah, that's basically correct. Yeah. How's our friend is saying, regarding artificial life forms, is there something essential to beings that would be impossible to replicate with technology? I don't think we're there today, but in principle. So this gets into opinions and speculation. In the past, I've sometimes said that if a sufficiently advanced mechanical body was created to the point where it was capable to be a structure for a sentient being to inhabit and use, then it's theoretically possible that someone could be reborn into that body. So I've had that opinion in the past. I don't have a strong opinion about it now. I don't know if I still would make a statement to that effect, but I could see an argument being made to that effect. I could see someone arguing that it's theoretically possible. Michael says, what is the difference between good karma and merit, if any? There isn't. It's functionally the same thing. It's just two ways of saying the same thing. Amaranta says, if devas are interfering in this world, are they all agreeing with the Buddha's teachings? If they aren't, why did they become devas? So, some devas are interested in Buddhism. Some devas are Buddhist. Most aren't interested. They're too busy having parties all the time and enjoying heavenly happiness. So Buddhism is not very interesting if you're just having a really great time all the time. So they became devas because they made a lot of good karma in past lives through practicing generosity, kindness, patience, and so on. All of that creates good karma that leads to being reborn as devas. That doesn't necessarily mean they have any interest in Buddhism. So there's lots of people who are very moral, virtuous, generous, and have zero interest in Buddhism. So devas practiced morality and kindness and generosity, which is how they became devas, but that doesn't mean they have any interest in awakening. And Emo says, I feel embarrassed that I want to stay a layperson, knowing that there is the path of liberation available for me. I can become a monk if I wish, but I have individual desires. I know they are a delusion, but I still believe in them. I'm embarrassed, but this is what is happening. Advice? Yeah, my advice is to relax, follow the 5 precepts, practice generosity, make merit, study the suttas, do some meditation. Rejoice in the fact that you're practicing the Dhamma at all. Rejoice in the good things that you're doing. Rather than beat yourself up for the good things you're not doing, praise yourself for the good things you are doing. There will always be a long list of things we're not doing. So praise yourself for the good things you are doing. If you don't want to be a monk, you don't have to be a monk. It's okay. Does it mean your path to awakening will be slower? Yeah, it does. Yeah. But that's okay. If you don't want to be a monk, you don't have to be a monk. Just do what you can. Praise yourself for the good Dhamma practice that you are doing, and make the aspiration to be a monk in a future life. It's totally fine. Amaranta says, do we need to have good relationships with devas? You need to have good relationships with everyone, all sentient beings. Humans, animals, devas, all of them. You should have a heart of boundless love and compassion towards all beings, whether humans or devas or animals or anything at all. Whether they're friendly or hostile, you should be loving and compassionate towards all of them. You don't necessarily need to cultivate a speaking relationship with devas, but just having a heart of love and compassion for them is sufficient. So Victoria says, if a lay devotee stays at a monastery for a few months and a monastic recognizes that they may have attained a stage of awakening, would they tell the person, or is it against the Vinaya? So if the monk thinks the lay person has some stage of awakening, in that case, the monk wouldn't need to tell the layperson, because the layperson would already know. They would already know for themselves that they're awakened. More commonly, what comes up is a layperson staying at the monastery and thinks they have some stage of awakening, and then they start telling everybody else that they think they're awakened. And then the monk gets involved to try to convince the layperson that they're not awakened. That's how things usually go. So if a monk thinks that a layperson has some stage of awakening, then the monk might talk with them about it, but usually not directly or bluntly, but kind of dancing around it to try to figure out, is this actually the case? But generally speaking, you don't just hit these things head on, because that usually causes more problems. Unless you mean the monk thinks that they themselves have attained some stage of awakening, in which case it is against the Vinaya to tell lay people. So if a monk thinks they're awakened, we cannot tell lay people. We can tell other monks, but we can't tell lay people. So Joseph says, could you speak on the non-virtue of covetousness, abhijja? How is that different from raga? So abhijja is normally defined as desiring that which belongs to others. So it's a bit of a more specific form of desire. But confusingly, it's also sometimes used in the suttas just to mean very strong wishes or very strong desires. So it doesn't necessarily have that specific of a meaning. It can also just have a more generalized meaning of strong desire. So it's not really dramatically different from the other words that we have for desire. So the Pali language has somewhere around 15 different words that could all be translated into English as desire. And there are subtle differences between them. But most of those subtle differences are not really relevant unless you're actually learning the Pali language and trying to figure out the subtle differences between different sutta passages. Otherwise, it's sufficient just to know desire is bad. Desire causes suffering. Try to let go of desire. That's usually sufficient. Okay, so it says, how should one react to the stories like family members knew you were going to be Buddhist when you were born and it's the wrong path, etc., and surrender to God Almighty, etc.? Not sure how to respond to evangelical beliefs and stories they create to tell you that Buddha's path is wrong. Would you still appreciate that aspect? It's kind of tough to agree with them since their concept of spirituality is absolute surrender to a supreme being, etc. Yeah, just don't have these conversations with them. Do not have theological conversations with them. It's just not going to be useful. Instead, if they have kindness, appreciate their kindness. If they have generosity, appreciate their generosity. If they have patience, appreciate their patience. If they have self-restraint, appreciate their self-restraint. And don't expect them to appreciate you at all. If they do, that's great. You can appreciate that. If they don't, well, no problem. Practice compassion for them. And Joe says, could you share skillful means to abstain from covetousness and encourage, improve, and praise non-covetousness? Contentment. Practice contentment, being content with what you already have, not wanting anything extra. And also contentment with the possibility of losing what you have. So contentment with having nothing at all. If you practice contentment, then what you wish for, the question you ask will emerge naturally. HPD says, can I study yoga and Buddhism at the same time? Well, you can study whatever you want. But if by yoga you mean a series of physical stretching exercises, then yeah, that goes with just about anything without any conflicts at all. However, if by yoga you mean a set of spiritual practices in Hinduism, then that's actually talking about practicing Hinduism. And Hinduism does actually have a number of fundamental ideological differences from Buddhism. So again, if by yoga you mean practicing contemplative Hinduism, then no, that's not compatible with Buddhism. So if by yoga you mean a series of physical stretching exercises, yeah, no problem. And Emo says, would someone only be enlightened if they're Buddhist? Could there be enlightened people that did not know Buddhism? So depends on what you mean by Buddhist. So we do have the concept in Buddhism of the Pacceka Buddha, which is somebody who attains awakening spontaneously at a time when Buddhism is not known. And a Pacceka Buddha is called Pacceka. Pacceka means alone. They're called Pacceka because they attain awakening by themselves without a teacher, and they also themselves do not have the ability to teach others. So they remain alone, the only Buddha, the only awakened one in that period of time. So that would be someone who is not Buddhist in the way that we would use the word Buddhist these days, but they could still be called Buddhist in the sense that they were trying to attain awakening. And they could still be called Buddhist in the sense that they are in fact Buddha, awakened. So anyone who attains awakening can, properly speaking, be called Buddhist, even if they don't have the word Buddha or the concept of Buddha or the concept of Buddhist or Buddhism. They could still be called Buddhist in the sense that they have attained awakening and therefore they're practicing awakened-ism. Buddhism just means the ism of awakening. So Buddhist just means someone who's practicing for awakening. That's all it means. So yeah, this would be called the Pacceka Buddha. And these days we would say that anyone who attains awakening has been to some degree influenced by Buddhism. So Buddhist concepts and ideas have spread across the globe. It's been 2,500 years. It's reached just about everywhere now. So anyone who attained awakening, we would say they've been at least subtly influenced by Buddhism. I would say nobody who attains awakening these days could say that they don't know Buddhism, in the sense that they've had some influence from the existence of Buddhism. MC says, in your monastic life, do you think you've encountered a person who has attained any of the stages of awakening? And it's hard to say for sure, of course, because, again, generally speaking, people who actually do have some awakening will never tell you. And the people who do tell you definitely don't have any stage of awakening. So it's always guesswork. I can think of exactly one monk I know who is an incredible practitioner. And if I found out that this person had some stage of awakening, I would not be the slightest bit surprised. It would be like, oh, of course, naturally. This person has demonstrated all the necessary qualities for many, many years. So it's not surprising. I've also met quite a number of monks who were reputed to have some stage of awakening, but when I met them in person, my observation was, no, they still have some work to do. They're not there yet. So I think there's way, way, way more people in the world who are reputed to be awakened than who actually are awakened. And there's way, 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 way more people in the world who think they're awakened than actually are. Awakening is rare. Even the first stage, the stage of the stream enterer, is very rare. It's not common to meet a person like that. It's extremely rare. And virtually everyone you meet who thinks they're a stream enterer is not one. Now, usually they're not even close. Norma says, can you please speak about the 3 different cravings? I assume you mean kamatanha, bhavatanha, and vibhavatanha. So kamatanha is craving for sensuality, craving for any kind of sensory experience. So any kind of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, or even thought would qualify. So craving for sensory experiences. Then bhavatanha is craving for states of being or identity or forms of existence. So wanting to be something, wanting to have a particular role or a particular identity or a particular experience. And then vibhavatanha is the desire to avoid states of being or states of existence, either partially, like wanting to avoid specific kinds of being, or completely, wanting to stop existing altogether. So those are the 3 kinds of craving. And HPD says, I also wanted to know if Amitabha Buddhism is okay to study. Did Buddhism really talk about the heaven realm that Amitabha Buddhism is talking about? I mean, it's okay to study whatever you want to study. It is important to recognize that Amitabha is not mentioned in the Pali Suttas. The first mention that we find historically of Amitabha comes about 500 to 600 years after the Buddha. What we do see in the suttas is the conceptual framework for the arising of Pure Land Buddhism. So in the suttas, we find, first off, the concept that there are innumerable world systems, not just the one that we live in, and that each world system can only have one Buddha at a time. And our world system is still in the era of Shakyamuni Buddha, so we can't have another Buddha here at this time. But since there's countless other world systems, it is possible that there could currently be Buddhas in one of the other, some of the other world systems. And also in the Pali Suttas, we find the concept of rebirth by aspiration. That if one forms the intention to be reborn in a particular realm, then if one has sufficient good karma, then it's more likely to happen. So if you add those 2 things together, then you wind up with the conceptual basis for Pure Land Buddhism to be formed. So these specifics of Pure Land Buddhism are not found in the Pali Suttas, but the foundation for it is found. Will you find anywhere in the Pali Suttas, will you find any mention of Amitabha Buddha in the Western Pure Land? No, you won't. But such concepts are not necessarily contrary to the concepts found in early Buddhism. Rather, they can be seen as a logical extension or inference from the concepts that we find in early Buddhism. Vanessa says, is it okay to take notes on or make annotations of the suttas while reading them? Yes, just please don't write in the sutta books. Out of respect for the suttas, don't write in the books. Take your notes separately. Kim says, can you talk about the 10 fetters and the stages of enlightenment? Ooh, that's a long answer. So I think it'd be better to just do a sutta on the topic. Can you find a sutta on that topic and add it to the list? Okay, good. Good question, but a bit more than we have time for in this setting. Victoria says, have you traveled to India to visit the Buddhist holy sites? I have not. Maybe one of these days I'll go, but I have not gone. Michael says, I saw there is a Vinaya rule about not giving teachings to someone with their head covered. Is this considered disrespectful? So that's from the Sakya rules, which are much lighter than the main Patimokkha rules. So the Sakya rules are things which are not inherently breaking the Vinaya, but rather if one is doing so with a intention of disrespect, then it becomes breaking the Vinaya. So it's a bit more specific there. And the Sakya rules are mostly based upon specific cultural customs in ancient India. So some of it is still relevant nowadays, but a lot of it is too culturally specific. One of them is, in fact, in the time and place of the Buddha, when listening to any kind of spiritual teaching, it was a way of showing respect was to remove your head covering. So if you had a hat or something, then you would take it off. And actually a similar custom is found in many religious traditions throughout the world. Like when someone enters a church, they'll commonly take their hat off. It also used to be a way of politely greeting someone. Like when you were greeting someone, you would take your hat off as a show of respect, and then you would put your hat back on after greeting the person. So this is something which has appeared off and on throughout various human cultures throughout history as a way of showing respect. So the idea was that if you're teaching Dhamma, if the people are deliberately showing disrespect for the Dhamma teacher, then that means they're also deliberately showing disrespect for the Dhamma. And therefore, you shouldn't waste your time. You shouldn't waste your time with such people. That's more the idea here. If somebody's really not interested in the Dhamma, and they're deliberately showing disrespect for both the Dhamma and for the teacher, then don't waste your time. Stay quiet or go away, but don't waste your time. That's the point of that rule. I'm reminded of one occasion when I was invited to give a Dhamma talk at a place, and I started giving the Dhamma talk, and it very quickly became obvious to me that most of the people in the room were not the least bit interested and weren't paying attention at all. And in fact, most of them were doing other activities in the background. And there was that moment where it just occurred to me, it's like, what is the point? Why am I even talking Dhamma if nobody is interested? And if they're not making any effort to show any respect or attention at all, it just makes it futile. It loses its flavor entirely. So I think that's more the point of that Vinaya rule. It's about assessing, is your audience actually sincerely interested in respectfully attending to the Dhamma? And if the answer is no, then don't waste your time. Don't throw your pearls before swine, as they say. So HPD clarifies the earlier question about yoga. I mean, like the Raja Yoga reading Patanjali. Yep, that's Hinduism, not Buddhism. Different religion, different ideologies, different concepts, different practices, different goals. Some things are compatible, some things are not. And it takes a very thorough understanding of Buddhism to know which is which. Joseph says, can you speak about faith followers and Dhamma followers? How are those stages on the path classified? Oh, these are interesting. So they're only mentioned in a few places in the suttas, and there's not a lot of description given. They sometimes seem to be kind of lumped together with stream enterers. And elsewhere, they seem to be more like a precursor stage. Someone who's not yet a stream enterer, but who will definitely become a stream enterer. And in a couple places, they seem to just be talked about as more like categories of Dhamma practitioners. So it's a bit nebulous, and it's actually not clear. There's different opinions on the matter. But I do tend to relate to it as being two basic approaches to the Dhamma. So the people who approach through a more intellectual interest in the Buddhist teachings, and the people who approach more through a faith level. So this faith in the Buddha, faith in the Dhamma. But the interesting thing is that both the faith follower and the Dhamma follower converge at the same point. They all wind up in the same place, which is stream entry. Okay, we had a brief disruption with the internet connection, but it appears to be back now. So it looks like there's still a few people joining in, so we'll continue. So Victoria said, if Buddhism became outlawed in the US and you had to be a monk in a Buddhist country, where would you go? Well, if it has to be a Buddhist country, I'd probably go to Taiwan, actually. I stayed for a couple of months in Taiwan a few years ago, and I really loved it. So I would actually be quite happy to, if I had to pick any one Buddhist country, I'd probably go and stay in Taiwan for a while. Second would probably be Sri Lanka, though I've never been to Sri Lanka. I suspect I would like it quite a bit. Moria asks, can someone who has not reached any stage of awakening teach and guide others to get to a stage of awakening? Yes. Yeah, that is possible. Rick says, for over 24 years, rehabilitating abused and neglected dogs has been an important part of my Buddhist practice. Sadhu. This has been one of the most beneficial ways to cope with chronic pain and illness and heal complex trauma. My well-being quickly goes downhill when I don't have the skillful means. Is this okay, or am I clinging too much to worldly conditions? Well, the thing is that when you have access to those conditions, then appreciate them. And when you don't, then find other ways to train your mind. So our training of the mind cannot be dependent upon specific conditions, because specific conditions will not always be available to us. And Sud says, does the Buddha give any advice to Pathujanas like me regarding how one can avoid the mind from falling away from the path into heedless, forgetfulness, unmindfulness in daily life? So you need to fill your life with reminders of Dhamma. Put Buddha quotes everywhere, real Buddha quotes, not fake Buddha quotes. Put Buddha quotes everywhere in your life, where you'll see them all over the place. Put Buddha images everywhere. Listen to Buddhist chanting when you're in your car. Basically, fill your life with reminders of the Dhamma. That's one thing that makes a huge difference. And Sarah says, karma is basically intention, but when an act becomes a habit and something repetitive, it generates less karma. I would say that the strength of intention does correlate to the strength of the karma. So the stronger your intention is, the stronger the karma is. The problem with habits is that they also tend to carry the karma of negligence, of not paying attention. So that also is generating karma, and it's a karma that leads to delusion. So that's actually quite problematic. Mindlessly engaging in habits is strengthening your delusion. So that's actually quite harmful. Sarah says, how would you define samsara? Would it be correct to say it is just a state of mind? That feels like an oversimplification, except in the sense that everything is all in the mind. Everything is all made of mind. Ryan says, what is the Buddhist consensus? Oh, Buddhist consensus. Wow, if there only was such a thing as consensus in Buddhism. What is the Buddhist consensus on whether if Jesus existed and his ability to walk on water, Bodhisattva? Also, why would he have had the karma of being on the cross? So, first off, getting consensus in the Buddhist world is a challenge. I think the only thing we can all agree on is that the Buddha existed and that he was fully awakened. I think that's about the only thing we all agree on. So I'll just speak about my own opinions. Did Jesus exist? Well, probably, almost certainly. Almost certainly there was a guy called Jesus who lived in the Middle East about 2,000 years ago. Did he have the ability to walk on water? It's quite possible. That's one of the standard psychic powers that the Buddha mentions that can be developed through cultivating samadhi in particular. So these are not specific to Buddhism. Anyone who practices spirituality can potentially develop psychic powers, which includes the ability to walk on water. So is it possible that Jesus was real and could walk on water? It's quite possible. Yeah. Was he a bodhisattva? I don't know. Why would he have had the karma of being on the cross? Doing bad deeds in past lives. That's why these things happen. Ryan says, I heard going to Thailand is optimal for Buddhist practice since it's the country with the most arhats. God, wow, where did these crazy stories come from? So I personally think Thailand is the country with the most people who claim to be arhats. That doesn't mean it's the country with the most arhats. Those are two very different things. There probably are some arhats there, but I suspect way fewer than people think. There's probably also some arhats in Sri Lanka. Again, way fewer than people think. There's probably some in Taiwan. Again, fewer than people think. There's probably a few in China. Again, fewer than people think. I think there's a few arhats pretty much anywhere that you have any significant number of Buddhists. Just very few of them, and mostly unknown. I actually suspect that, one, there's very few arhants in the world, and two, they're unknown. The famous ones are not the arhants. The more famous someone is, the less likely it is that they're an arhat. I suspect that the vast majority of the arhants in the world are just like some random nobody monk living in the middle of nowhere with like 10 disciples that nobody knows about. Jojo says, if we don't attain stream entry, is there a chance that instead of 7 lives or less, we might take a bit longer? Or is it basically attain stream entry or higher or bust? I mean, if you're a stream entry, you don't really need to worry whether it's 5 lives or 7 lives or 8 lives. Like, it just doesn't matter to you anymore. I take the number 7 as an approximation personally, but it's just kind of irrelevant. Like, if the Buddha had said 8 lives or 5 lives, it would have meant the same to me. It just means like it's guaranteed, but it's not going to happen right away. That's more the point. And Ryan says, I remember you saying you'd prefer not practicing in Buddhist countries because of politics. Could you explain that again, please? Oh boy. One of the problems in Buddhist countries is that the government gets involved in Buddhism. And they start trying to control how monks behave. They start to control what monasteries can do and can't do. And this causes huge problems because then monks can't actually live a life of Dhamma Vinaya. And this is really clear. So, for example, in Thailand, in 1924, they made it illegal to ordain women. And it was illegal for 80 years. And they only just lifted the ban in 2004. But to this day, because the government still interferes in monks' lives and interferes in monasteries, to this day, there's still very few bhikkhunis in Thailand. It's technically legal, but the government makes it really, really, really hard to actually do. So that doesn't happen in the United States because it's not a Buddhist country. It doesn't happen in non-Buddhist countries. So in Buddhist countries, governments use Buddhism as an instrument of political control. In non-Buddhist countries, that doesn't normally happen. Okay, Sarah says, in my practice, I have periods of high concentration where it's easy for me to practice and my mind is focused, and periods of the complete opposite. Is this normal? How can I stabilize my practice? Yes, it is normal. And your practice will stabilize on its own over time. Just keep practicing, observe the ups and downs, and don't worry about it. Just keep practicing. It's just the nature of practice that sometimes it seems to go well and sometimes not so well. So don't worry about it. HPD says, can you please explain what stream entry is and how it differs from arhantship and being a bodhisattva? Well, okay, that's actually quite a long answer, so I'll try to give a short answer. Stream entry is the first stage of awakening. Arhantship is the fourth and final stage. And the term bodhisattva just means a person aspiring to awakening, which is commonly understood to mean someone who wants to be a Sammasambuddha in a future life, but that's actually not the only use of the term. The term bodhisattva is a broader word that just means anyone who's aspiring to awakening. So it's sometimes said that anyone who's practicing Buddhism is a bodhisattva, because anyone who's practicing Buddhism is aspiring to awakening. Mo says, I went to a Zen center and to give homage to many Buddhas. Sadhu. Are there many Buddhas in Zen tradition and less Buddhas in Theravada tradition? So in the Pali Suttas, the Buddha mentions that there have been countless Buddhas throughout space and time, in the past, present, and future. Countless Buddhas. He just doesn't name very many of them. He only names a handful of them. But he says that there have been, are, and will be in the future countless Buddhas. There's just not that many names. Then as Buddhist history rolled on over the centuries, people started adding more and more names, naming specific Buddhas of past, present, and future. So then in the Mahayana traditions, there's a lot more named Buddhas. But the concept of there being countless Buddhas has been there since the beginning. That wasn't something that was added later on. So Theravada Buddhism has an infinite number of Buddhas, just like every other form of Buddhism. It just has fewer specific names, but still the same number of Buddhas. Kumu says, can you please speak about the 4 qualities for a person to be on the path of stream entry? Kalyanamitta, listening to the Dhamma, Yonasamanasikara, and Dhammanu Dhammapatipada. That sounds like it's coming from a particular sutta. So Kumu, if you can find the sutta and send the sutta reference to the monastery email, then we will include it in a future sutta talk. Norma says, are my questions coming through because I've written it 3 different ways? And I answered your question already, Norma. So I didn't answer the second and third time because I already answered it the first time. Yongchu says, when you said listen to Buddhist chants, English versus Pali, oh, any language is fine as long as it's Buddhist. Whatever inspires you. So I personally chant in Pali because that's the oldest Buddhist language. I also like Chinese chanting personally, but that's a personal preference. It's not universally shared. If you had to pick one, I would say Pali chanting because it is the oldest, the closest to the Buddha's own words. F. Jenny says, any advice on how to help friends with self-destructive habits such as alcoholism? Yeah, get them into treatment programs. Get them into addiction treatment. Don't try to help them on your own. It takes professionals. There are people who dedicate their entire lives specifically to helping people with addiction problems. It's a specific skill set which most people don't have. So you might just need to be realistic about the fact that you do not have the skill set to help your friends with alcoholism. But you can try to get them help from people who do have that skill set. And you can also contact addiction treatment specialists and talk to them. Tell them that you have friends with addiction problems and ask them for advice. So that's what I recommend. Contact addiction treatment centers, tell them what's going on and ask them for advice. Sarah Starr says, in another monk chat, you mentioned that you practice Zen Buddhism. What did you not like about that tradition and what made you interested in early Buddhism? I didn't exactly ever stop practicing Zen Buddhism because Zen Buddhism is a natural extension of early Buddhism. But what made me shift more towards early Buddhism was just that my core interest has always been in the Buddha, in understanding what the Buddha taught and living in accordance with what the Buddha taught. So that's always been my focus, and that just became increasingly clear as the years went by. Whatever Slav says, do you think radical left erroneously assumes Buddhism validates their ideologies? Does what is UT? Harm Buddhism by diluting and commercializing Buddhism? So I don't follow pop culture and I don't follow politics and I don't follow the news. So I think you're probably referring to things which I don't know about and things I probably prefer to continue not knowing about. So I don't know what radical left people say, and I don't know whether or not it has anything to do with Buddhism because I don't follow politics. So generally speaking, whenever people take Buddhism out of context to try to justify something, then that just means they're not really interested in Buddhism. Joseph says, would you say mudita would be a good practice for overcoming abhijja, abhihangsa, and raga? Well, mudita just means joy. So is joyfulness a good practice for overcoming these forms of desire? Yeah. But I would say contentment is better. And that looks like the last question. So we'll go ahead and conclude at this time. So we'll end the session with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you all next time.